Hello guys, and welcome to another video. And with the clock ticking down to ExileCon, today's video is actually discussing a few really interesting tidbits of information from the first ExileCon. And for those wondering, I'll be making a new addition to the Keystone Highlight series tomorrow. I know that series has taken a little bit of a break, but there's just so many things that I wanted to discuss before ExileCon arrives. And I know that once ExileCon is here, there will be tons of new things to talk about. So you can definitely expect more of the Keystone highlights coming up. But I was watching DS Lily's stream yesterday, and she was doing a bit of a Path of Exile 2 recap, going over all of the information that we have about PoE 2. And there was one segment from the first ExileCon that I had either forgotten about or missed entirely, and this was a bit of a Q&A after one of the keynote sections with Jonathan Rogers, Rory Rackham, and Neon. And the questions were submitted by the audience live at ExileCon, and you can really tell that these were very real questions too, because some of the developers didn't really know exactly how to respond to some of these questions. But there are some super interesting responses here on a few of the topics, and I just wanted to talk about some of these responses. So let's first take a look at this question about items with no sockets, or limited sockets. Check it out.
What about items that had set sockets or no sockets, like Kaum's Heart?
So Kaum's Heart is a really interesting trade-off now. No sockets on your armor. That's like you're down from 8 to 6. That's a real hard choice to make. We're actually talking to Mark about whether the life needed to come up a little bit in order to make the travel. He wasn't so sure about it though. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he's like nah. But yes. For example, I mentioned prismatic edge before. Eclipse. Sorry. Prismatic eclipse. That still has 3, one of each color. But some of the other fixed socket items we're changing around. So tabular, it's 3 white now. Yeah, we basically it's just basically a balance question. We'll change them as we need to change them.
We did take quite a lot of existing characters, in-game ones, and just try and one-to-one map them to the new system. And there is a lot of socket pressure. I suspect what will alleviate a lot of that, or determine whether or not it's going to be too much pressure or too little, is entirely how many meta gems and of what kinds we end up with or add. Obviously the aura one showed off does solve the aura problem or the reservation problem. It should ideally, if not that, another one work with heralds as well. And so losing 2 sockets from Kaum's, it actually was quite impactful. All of a sudden there's some utility skill or something you have to drop. Yeah, we'll see. Largely dependent on where the meta gems end up will be the answer to some of that.
This response from Jonathan Rogers on the topic of Kaum's Heart is fascinating to me, because the idea of having several 6 links relative to the current Path of Exile that we know, and having a Kaum's Heart equipped seems absolutely insane. But you can just really see that the developers are not quite certain on the balance of this one, with Jonathan suggesting that Kaum's Heart might need even more life to make up for the loss of 2 entire potential 6 links from the body armor slot. But Neon is seemingly opposed to this, which means that he still may believe that it's a worthwhile trade-off. I just think this is so interesting, and it might give us a little bit of an idea into the type of balance we're going to see in regards to Path of Exile's skill system and socket system. Because as it stands currently, the only builds really making significant use of Kaum's Heart in the current game are life stacking builds, typically using the Relic of the Pact or the Wrathpith Globe unique shield. And the discussion about metagems from Neon is insightful too, as metagems will largely free up many gem slots if they're able to solve typical problems within builds. We don't have many examples of metagems just yet. We've really only seen the metagem that you can socket several auras into, or the spell totem support and cast on critical strike. But I can definitely begin to imagine many of the metagems that we're likely to see. Pre-existing supports like urgent orders for Warcries, for example, will likely become a metagem, so you're able to socket all of your Warcries into a single link, or second wind to make use of extra multiple uses of different utility skills. The really interesting part is just how deep they'll go in regards to metagems and how many options will be offered to players to solve all of the complex socket pressure problems that the new system is likely to impose. The result of this will likely determine just how strong an item like Calm's Heart will be in the end, and determine the exact kind of balance we see on items like this in Path of Exile 2. Alright, well, what about another question? This one's in regards to ascending in Path of Exile 2. Let's take a look.
Oh, here's a good one. How many ascendancy points will you get, and how are lab trials still a thing?
Right. So basically, the lab will not be the way you ascend in 4.0. And I should say PoE 2, we've announced it now. Yeah, the lab won't be there. There will be another way to ascend. We're not ready to talk about it yet, but it will. It's not going to be in Act 1. It'll be around the same place that it was before. We'll talk about that more when we announce later acts. And then some of you might be asking then, do you still ascend by doing the lab in PoE 1's campaign? And the answer to that is we actually are heavily discussing maybe moving it out of the lab for PoE 1 as well. And if we are doing that, we might even do that before we deploy 4.0. So we'll have to see how that goes.
I feel like I would remember this if I had seen it the first time around, so it's definitely possible that I had just completely missed this Q&A before. But the response here from Jonathan provokes some thought about exactly how ascending will work after Path of Exile 2 is implemented into the game. With the talk of removing the labyrinth as a way to ascend from Path of Exile 1's campaign, my takeaway from this segment is that they possibly want to move away from the whole mini-dungeon style questline for ascending, and perhaps just roll it into the mainline campaign in some shape or form. This could be just via an optional side quest which sets the character on a path towards Ascension, and from there on out you'll just gain ascendancy points together with leveling up at certain level thresholds. It would be quite interesting to see Ascension simplified in the game, and I do think they want to keep the focus of the player on the narrative of the main storyline, something which is typically quite segregated in the first campaign and often feels disjointed at times. I know that many people have speculated that the Forbidden Sanctum could be introduced as a new method for Ascension in Path of Exile 2, but I question this approach, as it's essentially very similar in concept to the current Labyrinth, even though it's a little bit updated of course. What we do know at this stage is that they haven't removed the Labyrinth as a method of Ascension from the original campaign just yet, even though this response definitely seemed to suggest that they might want to make that happen sooner rather than later, so their ideas on this concept may have changed since this Q&A took place. And what about this question on the balance of two-handed weapons versus dual wielding and the use of shields?
Is there going to be any sort of rebalancing of two-handed weapons in the context of 6 links being more available to one-handed weapon users?
That's a really good question.
I think nothing specific comes to mind. We're doing something before I give the wrong impression here. Nothing specific comes to mind, as in we haven't decided it, but itemization and weapons in general will be getting, large modifications.
Well, it's worth mentioning that because all the base types in PoE 2 are new, we effectively have to relay out the entire, series from top to bottom.
That's right.
And so during that process, there will certainly be a lot of iteration going on with all of that.
Although nothing concrete is mentioned here, I expect that a lot of the balance related to this aspect has been founded with the new weapon type system that Path of Exile 2 will bring to the game. This is most definitely a tough task that they have ahead of them to be able to make two-handed weapons appealing enough to the point that players will want to actively choose them over the currently much more favourable options like shields. The new gem socket system in the context of the current game will exacerbate the problem even further, where builds that were previously using a two-handed weapon to gain the advantage of having an additional 6-link will no longer have this advantage over a build that's dual-wielding or using a shield. So it will be quite interesting to see how they plan to solve this problem. Personally, I'd like to see even more of a damage differential on two-handed weapons, especially the comparison of two-handed melee weapons against their one-handed counterparts, and the comparison of caster staff mods with wands and scepters. The trade-off here in theory should be that you are losing defensive potential to largely gain in offensive potential, something which I think is realised in the current version of the game to somewhat of a degree, but will need to be tweaked in Path of Exile 2 to make sure that the choice between the two is meaningful enough. And so, these were a few really thought-provoking responses to some very intriguing questions. What do you guys think about that Kaum's Heart question? Will we perhaps see a bit of a buff to Kaum's Heart and other socketless items? Things like the Grey Spire come to mind. I wonder what's going to happen to that item in PoE 2. And what about Ascension? Would you guys be happy to see the back of the Labyrinth? Personally, I very much enjoy Zaro and his voice line, so I hope that character lives on in Path of Exile 2 in some shape or form. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We're now just over 2 weeks away from ExileCon 2023. The hype is absolutely real. If you've enjoyed this video, and especially if you want to stick around with the channel for more of the same, please do like and subscribe, or consider supporting the growth of this channel by becoming a member. You can do that from as little as 99 pence per month. The information can be found by clicking the join button below. And of course, a big thank you to my current channel members. And thank you, of course, for watching this video. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.